Okay, well, thank you everyone for tuning in and welcome to CTO Talk. I am your host, Matt Ferrari. On this 30-minute program, we get to discuss issues, challenges, and opportunities that are really impacting healthcare and healthcare technology. As always, you can follow the show on Twitter at hashtag CTO Talk or follow me at MP Ferrari. With me, I'm really excited today. I've had the privilege of partnering with Microsoft for actually most of my career. And today I get to speak with David Houlding, the principal healthcare lead at Microsoft Azure. Really wanted to dig in today on the topic of healthcare blockchain and as it relates to security and compliance when possible, and have been really fortunate to know David for quite some time now with a really kind of deep lineage of experience in privacy, security, compliance, blockchain, AI, machine learning, all those things that we've been talking about for months here on the show. So really great to bring in someone who knows this deeply within Microsoft Azure. So David, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Matt. Great to have this opportunity.
Would you mind kind of walking us through your background and
Yeah, sure.
maybe some current projects that you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll keep it brief and we can go deeper as you like. But currently serve as the principal healthcare lead at Microsoft. So work for a team in Microsoft called the Industry Experiences team. We're 100% focused on healthcare and what I'm doing, provider, payer, pharmaceuticals, life sciences worldwide. And we're actually 100% partner focused. So partner to us is providing solution services or both to healthcare and really working to help them be successful with Microsoft and our platforms and tools and help them to scale. So that's my day job. And, blockchain is one of the workloads that runs on Azure. And we're super excited about blockchain. It's getting traction in healthcare. It's not an if, it's a now. There's several large scale initiatives either in pilot or already in production and showing business value. It's not because it's blockchain and blockchain's cool. It's because it's showing business value. It's helping reduce healthcare costs and improve patient outcomes, improve engagement experiences of patients or healthcare professionals and so on. So super exciting time to be talking about blockchain in healthcare because it's right on that sort of watershed and starting to snowball. Also have the honor of serving as the chair of the HIMSS blockchain task force. So anyone out there that's planning to go to HIMSS 20, know that we'll have a blockchain symposium, we'll have a blockchain series during the main event, we'll have a blockchain breakfast panel on the Thursday. There's a ton of exciting stuff going around blockchain in healthcare at HIMSS 20. And lastly, serve as an advisor to the British Blockchain Association. But with that, I should actually mention I've only been at Microsoft less than 2 years. Prior to that, I was serving as the Director of Privacy, Security, Compliance with Intel Health and Life Sciences. That is actually where I first got involved with blockchain. At that time, in the early days of blockchain, it was asserted as a security panacea or silver bullet, which it of course is not. But I was tasked with really getting my mind around what it is and what it isn't. And the more I got into it, the better I understood where it's strong in security and where it needs some, compensating security controls to augment it, but also grew to really understand its applicability to healthcare. And there's some fantastic potential around blockchain. Don't think of it as a security tool. It has security and it enables compliance and actually can empower data subjects with their privacy in ways not possible before. But first and foremost, it's a platform that can deliver healthcare value, like, again, reducing costs, improving outcomes, et cetera. So it's really it is a platform. Think of Bitcoin as one sort of application running on top of this platform. But just like the internet, there's lots of websites, there's lots of applications, and Bitcoin's like one website, right? I mean, there's tons and tons of applications of blockchain in healthcare. Any areas you wanted to go deeper than that? I intentionally kept it fairly high level.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I'm glad you brought up two things to start us off. The first being, HIMSS 20, but I'm hoping to actually attend this symposium this year for blockchain and really excited that it's becoming really a deeper topic, as I have the opportunity of working, even as an Azure partner and really focusing even in the kind of the healthcare VC world. It's oftentimes a misnomer of that, that blockchain isn't really, making an impact outside of the second topic you mentioned, which is Bitcoin. And so what I really wanted to push on today, David, is really helping educate the audience around, some of the use cases that we're seeing in blockchain and healthcare, whether it be medical identity or your point around privacy of data or helping drive interoperability. Would really love to kind of dig into that. But I guess to kick us off, for those folks in the audience who may not understand what blockchain really is and why, I'm excited to even talk about it, Would you mind kind of describing it in layman terms?
Yeah, happy to. So, there's kind of three facets to blockchain, and you touched on one of them, the Bitcoin, the cryptocurrencies and tokens. The other one is ICOs and fundraising. And the third one, which is where we're really excited, it's the enterprise use cases and values that blockchain can deliver to healthcare and other industries. And so think of blockchain as, this B2B middleware, if you will, that sits between organizations. So in healthcare, we have a consortium, a group of healthcare organizations that want to collaborate around a specific use case with specific data, specific functionality. Blockchain is like this B2B middleware that sits between those organizations and can connect to their enterprise systems. And their enterprise systems are going to be sitting on a lot of data. There's big data silos under them, right? And not all that data is suitable for blockchain. A very small part of it is. And so it's really around the specific use cases. What of the data that's currently in those silos should be put on blockchain for the consortium to collaborate for mutual value. And so blockchain is this decentralized network. There's no central node. Think of blockchain as a sort of collaboration superhighway. And the on-ramp and off-ramp for each organization is their blockchain node. This is actually a process that can run in your DMZ on-prem, or it can run in the cloud. Of course, Azure's one cloud that runs blockchain nodes. Pretty much any type of blockchain you like will run in Azure. These blockchain nodes are the things that connect to your enterprise system. Blockchain really doesn't have much user interface, right? The interface is the enterprise systems. Look, you could put a mobile app in front of it. You could put a website in front of it, but blockchain's really connecting in on the back end of the servers. And so each of these blockchain node processes that can run in the DMZ or in the cloud, it's sitting on top of what we call a shared ledger. Think of that as a copy of a type of storage. It's not really a database. It's more like a ledger, like a linear record of transactions. And the different nodes in the blockchain each maintain a copy of that shared ledger. And whenever a new transaction or a new block goes onto that shared ledger, the mandate of the nodes, the sort of mission of the nodes, is to maintain the consistency and validity of that data across the copies of the shared ledger across the decentralized blockchain network. So the vast majority of blockchain that we are seeing in healthcare, and this isn't religion, this is just what I'm seeing, is upwards of 99% of it is what we call private consortium blockchain. Think of this as a blockchain island where, there's a defined set of organizations that are connecting to that particular blockchain island. And they all know each other. They're all well known to each other. They're all highly trusted. They have a business need to know. On the flip side, there's a notion of a public blockchain, which, Bitcoin is built on, or Ethereum public is. And the vast majority of healthcare is not using that type of blockchain network. The public blockchains also typically have consensus algorithm. Think of that as the sort of protocol between the blockchain nodes. And the consensus algorithm with public blockchains tends to be proof of work or a mining style consensus algorithm. And so mining, as we know, takes a fair amount of compute power and, electricity and hardware. But, private consortium blockchains, like we're seeing in healthcare, they do not have any notion of mining. And so there's no significant additional power consumption or hardware. And so the notion that blockchain's green does not apply to enterprise use of blockchain. Wow. Did that make sense, Matt?
It did. And it's very helpful because, oftentimes folks, I think, picture, to your point, kind of around efficiency, they picture kind of enormous, high churning out machines living inside of data centers, just churning through things. So it's great to see kind of the ability for public cloud to start to really provide efficiency there. As you think, however, as it applies to healthcare, David, how should a consumer think about, security or integrity of the actual data on blockchain?
Yeah, and if I could, I'm going to tackle that in two parts. One is I'll kind of talk about a layered view of blockchain and where we are in healthcare and where we think it's going with blockchain, what we're seeing, and sort of the extrapolation of where it's likely to grow from there. And then what we can do is segue into what are the privacy, security, and compliance sort of elements, and where is blockchain strong, where could it use some help, etc. But in terms of what we're seeing, where we are in healthcare and where it's going, so there's really 5 layers we're looking at it. And layer 0, where we are essentially today, is we've done a ton of work in healthcare, digitizing data, putting data in electronic format. The unfortunate thing is most of that data, the vast majority of that data, is in silos, right? And there's little if any sharing. So there's this massive untapped potential to do what we call secure target targeted sharing of the healthcare data across B2B networks, across these consortiums of healthcare organizations where it makes business sense. And that's sort of the data sharing facet of blockchain. And once that data is on blockchain, you can also put executable code on blockchain in the form of smart contracts, which are now Turing complete. And, so you can essentially put some pretty rich executable logic on top of the blockchain. And the advantage of that is then you're not depending on all the leaf nodes of the blockchain, the enterprise systems, to do all the compute. You can actually do some of that basic compute right on the blockchain. Imagine a provider sending a pre-authorization request to a payer over blockchain, and maybe 80% of the pre-auth requests a payer gets are pretty straightforward, and they could actually be done right on the blockchain. Then you wouldn't depend on the leaf node, like if it was down or if it was slow or is extra cost. You could just do that right on the blockchain. It'd be much faster, decentralized, highly reliable because there's no single central point of failure. Layer 3, cryptocurrencies and tokens. Sometimes you end up with this challenge in consortia collaborating over blockchain where you could have asymmetry where a very big member of the consortium is putting a ton of data and sharing and collaboration into blockchain, and they feel like, well, that other member in the consortium is not putting as much, and this is kind of a fairness challenge with that kind of asymmetry. And so cryptocurrencies and tokens give us a way to reward participation, contribution proportional to the actual size of the contribution, and you resolve that asymmetry problem. Cryptocurrencies and crypto tokens also give us a way to incent engagement, like with patients. Patients, if you consent, opt in to participating in clinical trials, sharing your data, you'll be rewarded with these crypto tokens. You can then redeem for reduced cost of services or other benefits. If you comply with your treatment plan, you will be rewarded, right? There's all kinds of opportunities to improve compliance, improve collaboration and sharing and so forth with cryptocurrencies and tokens. Lastly, artificial intelligence and machine learning, this phenomenal opportunity to power AI and machine learning to the next level with blockchain. Those are super data hungry. And right now, most AI efforts are drawing just from one organization, from one silo. What if we could draw data from across a consortium? We could build shared models. We could collaborate on testing and test results and validation, and we could do it much better as a team, as a consortium of healthcare, rather than each one going it alone. So that's kind of the layered view opportunity around blockchain. But I'll pause there for a moment, Matt, just to see if you have any questions on that. Otherwise, we can segue into the privacy, security, compliance.
Yeah, I would love to do that. And thinking about security, you offered up kind of where blockchain needs some help. So I know lots of CIOs listen to this show and have constant interest in adopting new technology, but as I'm sure you know, David, they have to do it with lots of concern around compliance wrappers and regulations and Code of Federal Regulations considerations and all these things. So I'd love to hear from you, kind of where do you see its strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah, so let's tackle security first. And, as security professionals, we need to look at things from a confidentiality, integrity, and availability standpoint. So a lot of times, to non-security people, security is equated with avoiding breaches, and that's certainly really important. Breaches are usually breaches of confidentiality, but equally important, we want to protect the availability of data and systems. Ransomware, denial of service are examples of attacks on availability, and we want to protect against those too. There's also integrity and protecting integrity, right? And making sure data is accurate, complete, and up to date. And we want to make sure that's protected. So where blockchain is really strong is integrity and protecting data integrity, right? Blockchain's immutable. So what that means is if you put data on the blockchain, it's impractical, for all intents and purposes, impossible. Assuming a suitable level of decentralization, the data integrity is very strongly protected. So, there is no modification or deletion of transactions that are actually on the blocks of the blockchain. So very strong in integrity, not much additional to do there. On the availability side, blockchain is really strong on protecting the availability of the overall network, because remember, it's decentralized. There's no single central point of failure. But blockchain really doesn't do much to protect the availability of any one particular blockchain node. And as healthcare now is entering production use of blockchain, its mission critical systems, enterprise systems, could grow to depend on blockchain, right? For patient care even, and any disruption is degradation of quality of care or even a patient safety issue. So it's important to protect the actual nodes of the blockchain. That's where a little help is needed. Though remember, those nodes are the on-ramps and off-ramps. So if you're a healthcare organization, you're connected to a blockchain through a particular blockchain node. you're running either in your DMZ or in the cloud and that node goes down, you've lost your connection to that blockchain. So you can protect your node's availability with things like availability zones, redundancy across availability zones, load balancing, automated failover, backup and restore, business continuity, disaster recovery, anti-DDoS, anti-distributed denial of service attack, safeguards, having redundant communications. Like if it's in the cloud, people often think about the nines of the data center, but it's also about your connectivity with the cloud. If you have one way of connecting to the cloud, one network, and that network goes down, you're cut off from the cloud. And the cloud might still be running, but you can't get to it, right? So having redundant communications as well. Now on the confidentiality side, that's probably actually where blockchain needs the most help. And the biggest lever that healthcare has to pull with mitigating risk to confidentiality is what data goes on the blockchain. And so think of blockchain as this cog that sits in the middle of what I call a big machine. That's all of the enterprise systems across the consortium. Blockchain's this little cog in the middle. It's kind of joining them and facilitating collaboration around a specific use case. And it's necessary for the big machine, all the consortium, enterprise systems, to be able to resolve things like PII, or personally identifiable information, or PHI, protected healthcare information. But it is not necessary for that information to actually be on the blockchain. And in fact, there's really good reasons to keep it off the blockchain: security, privacy, compliance, and in some cases, performance. You start thinking about putting big data like genomics and diagnostic imaging on blockchain, that's not a good thing from a performance standpoint, or privacy, security, compliance. So think about your use case and what's the minimal but sufficient data to put on the blockchain, and limit it at that, like field by field. Do we need this particular field on the blockchain to enable this use case? If the answer is no, leave that data in the enterprise systems. Keep the PII off blockchain, keep the PHI off blockchain wherever possible. You still need to have identifiers on blockchain, but those can be opaque, benign, alphanumeric strings, and they don't have to be things like social security number, date of birth, etc. That stuff can live off chain. And there's actually really good compliance reasons to do that as well. If you encounter right to be forgotten, like with GDPR, you can't delete it if it's on the blockchain. So keep that PII off chain. If you need to delete it, you can do that, and you essentially de-identify what's on the blockchain. So confidentiality, again, biggest lever. Be frugal about what data you put on. Keep the sensitive data off if you can. It's driven by the use case you're focusing on. Really discourage people from putting a bunch of data on blockchain and figure out later how to use it. No, that's not a good idea. Go at it from the use case standpoint, from the business value standpoint, and minimal but sufficient. The second biggest lever is the encryption that you can use. Obviously, you can encrypt data on blockchain, but that again is not a silver bullet. It's not a panacea. Key management is the Achilles heel of any encryption. And so encryption is one other layer of protection, in addition to being frugal about what data you put on. Remember, the blockchains is B2B middleware, so it lives outside of your internal firewall. So by definition, it's a different risk landscape, right? So you got to mitigate against unauthorized access. So encryption is a key one. Also, identity and access management, right? On an organizational level, that's essentially what a private consortium blockchain is. They're limiting, which organizations can connect, and organizations need to have they need to be well known. They need to be highly trusted. They need to have a business need to know, right? I mean, HIPAA says only authorized access to PHI, and so putting it on something like a public blockchain is a non-starter, because you don't know who's connecting to it. It's anonymous and anybody could, right? So that's another reason why healthcare is gravitating first to private consortium blockchains. But the last sort of facet of security I wanted to touch on is, we all know in healthcare about business associate breaches, right? You're a covered entity, either a payer or a provider, and you engage a business associate, a data processor, if you will, that is, using some PHI data to render a service, and they have a breach. It impacts them. It impacts the covered entity. Not good for anyone, right? Not good for the patients as well. And so there's a similar risk in blockchain, right? When you have a consortium, if one member puts on some PHI onto the blockchain or any kind of data, as a result, another member of the consortium pulls that data off. They happen to be weak in security and they have a breach. It's going to impact them. It's going to impact the whole consortium, right? And the source organization. So there's this notion of adequacy of security across the consortium, and this is opportunity for proactive risk assessment, proactive audits, and sharing that information across the consortium, so that if there are any weak points of security, insufficiently mitigated risks or non-compliance in the audits, those can be remediated proactively. And that's actually a really important trust building mechanism, right? Is doing that proactively, sharing it across the consortium helps the the consortium members understand that, hey, everybody's got an adequate level of security, everybody's compliant with regulations, we all have the same common interests around a use case, the business value. It just makes it easier to build trust. In contrast, if there is a breach and it impacts the whole consortium badly, that could really taint and potentially destroy a blockchain collaboration. That was security. Any questions on that?
I think from a question perspective, I think the audience, David, would love to hear from you, whether it be present or future. What is your view into kind of the future of how healthcare organizations that want to, leverage more sensitive data, whether a PII, PHI, how do you see that, coming to fruition, whether it be changes within blockchain technology itself or changes in security architecture?
So leveraging more sensitive data with blockchain, I mean, think of blockchain as this one cog in the big machine, right? And it's possible today to do blockchain and even have PHI be part of that collaboration, even without the actual PHI being stored on blockchain. What I mean by that is you can still identify patients, you can identify organizations, you can identify medical devices, packaging of drugs, any number of things. You can identify them on blockchain, and where it pertains to individuals like data subjects, like patients or healthcare professionals, that's going to be PII. And the key is you don't need to actually store the toxic PII on the blockchain. That's going to stay in the enterprise system. So think about any collaboration around any use case today that involves sensitive data like PHI. That can happen. There's nothing in blockchain or security risk mitigation that's gating that. The only caveat is keep that information in the enterprise systems versus in the blockchain. The kind of information that actually should go on the blockchain is high-level, lightweight metadata, like what type of data exists, where does it exist, like a pointer, hash code to verify the integrity of the data, cryptocurrencies and tokens, provenance information, audit information. These are great types of information to go on blockchain. In contrast, keep the PII off, keep the PHI, like heavy PHI data, like especially diagnostic imaging, genomics, that kind of thing. It's too heavy for blockchain, even aside from the privacy, security, compliance. Blockchain, remember, every time you add data to that ledger, it's going to be replicated around the entire blockchain network. You might start small and have a small pilot, but imagine when you grow internationally and there's thousands of blockchain nodes, and every time somebody adds something, it's got to go around all of those nodes, right? That's a huge load. So from a performance standpoint, you want to keep the blockchain data very lightweight. So one example of a use case for blockchain is, a decentralized record location service to facilitate health information exchange. You go to a provider, they take an X-ray. What goes on blockchain is not the X-ray itself, but metadata. Hey, an X-ray was taken for this patient, again, not social security number, date of birth, etc. Opaque, benign identifier on blockchain for that patient that can be resolved to PII off-chain. But metadata about the X-ray, was it the torso, etc., resolution, machine, all provenance information. But a pointer, hey, it exists at XYZ health system, and a hash code of that X-ray to verify its integrity. And then that's what can go on blockchain. Then patient goes to another provider, that provider looks on the blockchain, what do we know about this patient? Oh, there's an X-ray from last week from this other health system. We should get that to treat this patient. They can initiate a secure direct peer-to-peer request to that first health system to get that X-ray. And that direct peer-to-peer request, the conveyance of that actual X-ray, does not need to happen via blockchain, right? That can happen secure direct peer-to-peer, like through a secure REST API or otherwise. And so blockchain forms this little cog in the middle that facilitates the storing of the metadata, but also the search, discovery, and subsequent secure direct peer-to-peer exchange. Does that make sense?
It does, and I really appreciate the use case. I think that'll help everyone kind of break that down. And I know we're running out of time, so I'd love to kind of close with your view on compliance. We've talked a lot about security. How about on the compliance side as CIOs approach blockchain?
Yeah, so there's a couple additional things to add. So obviously the types of data you put on blockchain are going to impact what kind of regulations you're held to, right? If you're doing PHI in the US with US citizen data, HIPAA is going to be applicable, right? If you're putting European citizen data on some element of PII, you could be held to GDPR. So understand what types of data are going on and what kinds of regulations, data protection laws you're going to be held to, right? It might seem logical, but another sort of big vector in this is the location of your blockchain nodes, right? Because remember, under each node is this shared ledger, a copy of the data that's on the blockchain, and where that data physically exists, where that node physically exists, if you're on-prem, the location of your data center, or if you're in the cloud, what sort of cloud data center are you using? Where is that? Is that in Europe? Is it in the US, et cetera? That's going to have an impact on the jurisdictions that you're held to from and the types of data protection laws or regulations. So pay attention to the location of your nodes. That may seem simple, but a lot of blockchain might start off very local, like in one state even, and then grow multi-state, like even national, and then grow international. So think about the trajectory of the blockchain long term in terms of span, where it could potentially go. In some cases, you just don't know, right? So it's better to leave your options open and be frugal and pay attention to compliance right up front with blockchain and kind of keep your options open. Just know when you're putting certain types of data on, it may actually throw some obstacles up for the growth of your blockchain. For example, in GDPR, there's data sovereignty requirements. And so any flow of European citizen data out of Europe and into the US or other countries could represent trans-border data flow issues, right? Understand those kinds of things, that if you were starting a blockchain in Europe, but then stood up a node in the US, whatever's in that shared ledger is going to flow to the US. So you could have data sovereignty, trans-border data flow type issues. The other one is immutability and right to be forgotten. Again, is one of the things with data protection laws and like GDPR is if the patient says, hey, I want my data to be deleted, you need to comply, right? And if that data is immutable because you put it on the blockchain, you've got a problem. But if you leave the actual PII off chain, you can delete it, and then that essentially de-identifies what's on the blockchain and you can comply. So those are some of the key sort of challenges with compliance with blockchain. It is absolutely possible to comply with regulations, data protection laws using blockchain. And it was really refreshing to see even a couple of years ago, Health and Human Services running a competition. Hey, how could we use blockchain in healthcare and remain HIPAA compliant and so forth? So there's very definitely ways to be compliant with blockchain, but it does require you to pay attention to compliance upfront in your blockchain initiative, because the type of use case you focus on, the type of data, where you store that data on or off chain could have compliance ramifications, and you don't want to discover those late. That's something you want to factor in early on.
Very, very helpful. And I know that we could go for probably another half hour. I only got through some of the questions that I had on my mind today, but I know we're out of time. David, any upcoming events or any kind of Azure-based, thoughts or announcements you wanted to kind of just let everybody know about?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely come visit us at HIMSS 20. If you want to come to the blockchain symposium, register early. It did totally fill up at HIMSS 19 in March this year. So register early if you want to do that. I'll be there the whole time at HIMSS. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, Twitter if you want to connect. That's really it. Super exciting things going on at Microsoft. Matt, thanks so much for this opportunity again.
Thanks again, David, and of course to our listeners for tuning in. If you have a comment about today's episode, don't hesitate to reach out. You can either follow #CTO Talk on Twitter or follow me at MP Ferrari. You can, of course, always learn more about CTO Talk at healthcarenowradio.com or at cleardata.com. And I'm Matt Ferrari. Until we talk again, have a good week, everyone.